Hello, and welcome to another episode of EP Talks, the official podcast of Everyday Principal, leading the K-12 industry in principal-specific professional learning. In this conversation, Wicks and John Hattie explore the critical aspects of leadership in education, focusing on the role of principals in enhancing student learning through effective leadership practices. They discuss the importance of principal efficacy, the need for clarity in leadership, the significance of feedback, and the conditions necessary for collective efficacy among staff. Hattie emphasizes the importance of prioritizing the right problems, fostering a positive school culture, and the art of listening to create an environment conducive to improvement. The conversation also touches on the necessity of establishing trust and transparency within the school community, as well as the importance of setting clear leadership intentions that align with student outcomes. Inform, influence, inspire. Everyday Principal.
Well, thank you. It's quite an honor for me. I know that myself and all the listeners and the followers that are part of the Everyday Principal Network are very, very familiar with you, with your research. Every school, every district that I've worked with across the country knows the work of John Hattie, the meta-analyses, and the work all around trying to gain the greatest effect size. So, John, first of all, I want to welcome you to EP Talks.
Great to be talking with you, Andre.
Yeah. Well, knowing that, many people obviously will know who you are. They will know the work that you do. Our goal for today is to, kind of whet their palate a little bit with what they're familiar with. So I'll have you share just a summary of the elevator speech that you've given probably 1,000 times on the well known for, but the twist for us today being a company that focuses on principal and assistant principal development is really taking that idea of effect size for students and applying it to that of the role of the building principal. So, but first things first, give us the rundown of who John Hattie is.
All right. Well, right now, I'm very happily retired from my university job and my university career, which was all about psychometrics and statistics and nothing to do with visible learning. But I came into the business sideways as a statistician, psychometrician, and it stunned me, Andre, that everybody I ever talked to knew exactly what they had to do to improve student learning, and it was all so different. And so at the same time when I started my career, Gene Glass invented this thing called meta-analysis, and it asked three things. How big is the effect? Are the moderators, are the things which change that effect, such as does the effect differ in high school, primary school, where you live in the US or I live in Melbourne? And the third one that always intrigues me is the why. Why is it so? And so I started collecting meta-analyses to ask, can I change the question from what works to what works best? And actually it was sitting in Gil Sachs's office at the University of Washington, your state, where it dawned on there, maybe bringing them together can do it. And so that started a kind of lifetime adventure of collecting meta-analyses and coding them until I got a sufficient sample size. And it was a hobby. I put it aside. And around the mid-2000s, early 2000s, I decided to get it out of my system and write a book. That's it. Well, it kind of didn't work that way. So since then, in 2008, I hope I've tried to continue to modify it, refine it. And one of my blessings, Andre, is I have the world's best critics. And so I really listen to the criticism. I really listen to it. And the work you do, the work many people do on leadership. Maybe I didn't get it all right the first time. So 2023, I had another go at principalship. And the other advantage for me is since 2008, a lot of schools have tried to implement visible learning. And certainly the work that I do with the schools, I get that data. So I've got a better understanding. And so the whole notion of principalship has enhanced in my view over the last 15, 20 years in terms of what I've been saying. But it's a wonderful hobby to have.
Yeah, well, you've turned a hobby into what some would call a masterpiece. And while you have the toughest critics, if you're like most people, you are your own toughest critic, right?
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. That meeting, people like you mentioned Doug Reeves and Michael Fuller and Vivian Robinson are all good friends, constantly keeps me on my edges. And the beauty is the world keeps producing the research. So there's still lots of contests. Like take, for example, 2008, the literature was full of the distinction between instructional and transformational leaders. Since Vivian Robinson's work showing the absolute superiority of the instructional over the transformational, it's become so messy that it doesn't make any sense anymore to keep using those terms. And so that's the nature of the research, is you've got to keep trying to come up with a better and better narrative to explain the why.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is absolutely the truth. And this is how you do it. I think that one of the things that we really focus on in my building is this idea of socializing to normalize. If you want to normalize something, you have to socialize it, which means you have to have dialogue, you have to pick each other apart. You have to be willing to be of the mindset that continuous improvement is predicated on feedback. So you have to be open to the criticism, open to the feedback, and kind of subscribe yourself to the possibility that you don't have it all figured out yet. And when you can do that, you kind of open up the world. You do what I call, and that is, just removing the ceiling of what's possible. Well, I know that obviously your research around effect size, like I mentioned earlier, is focused on obtaining the greatest effect size in terms of like student learning. At the top of the list is efficacy. And so when I started building out Everyday Principle and taking your research and looking at it through a new lens, this idea of principle efficacy really shown out to me. If efficacy, teacher efficacy and student efficacy is producing the greatest effect size in the classroom, why wouldn't principle efficacy also be the greatest predictor of effect size across a whole school? And so with that idea, I want to try and keep the conversation as organic as possible. And so might throw in a couple conversation starters here and there. One of those is this, and it's something that you've coined as know thy impact. And so what I've done is, prior to this conversation, is taken some of those big ideas that you've researched and unpacked and tried to give a paired leadership type question out with it. So know thy impact. The leadership version is know your leadership impact. What would that look like?
Well, I want you, every time you walk into a staff room, every time you walk into the school, each morning to say, my job here today is to evaluate my impact. And if that's the starting premise, I think all good things follow, because it's kind of, as you hinted, you are open to new ideas. You're open to things not working. You're open to problems. You're open to successes. You're willing to accept negative evidence, and you're willing to act on it. But a key step in what you then talked about efficacy is also using the word collective efficacy. It's doing it with others. It's having others critique. It's others bringing you problems. And I think one of the most critical parts of knowing your leadership impact is ensuring that each time you've got the right problem on the table. It is very easy to solve problems that aren't that critical, that don't have much impact. It's very easy to divert and solve the problems you want. The other part of it is that leaders have kind of three foci. They've got the students, they got their teachers, and they got their parent community group, notwithstanding you've got superintendents and other things as well. And so knowing your impact on all those different avenues, getting the right problems on the table, because one of the criticisms of my work is, I haven't got the time to do it. Well, my argument is that every principal's got the same time. Some prioritize that time and some don't prioritize that time. And so that priority, you know this, Andre, when principals come to work each morning, they don't have much prediction over the 70 to 80 things they have to deal with in the day. And the skill of being a principal is that prioritization. It's knowing when to delegate. It's knowing how to put a problem aside and bring one to the fore. That's a huge ask. And so you've got to admire the talent of principals. But your notion, know that leadership impact? Absolutely. When you go home each night, I want you to say, I have pride in what I did today. You're not necessarily building for a magnificent future 10 years down the line. You're building it for right now, because every kid, every day, every teacher, every day needs your improvement eyesight.
Yeah. No, I think that's super insightful. And something that you said, kind of the centerpiece of your response to that question was identifying what is the right problem to solve. And I think that's super interesting. It's an interesting construct because it's really easy, like you mentioned, the 70 to 80. That's not counting just like the little stuff, right? So you have all these decisions, you have to be discerning, you have to be able to prioritize, but knowing what the problem or the problems to focus on is super important. You also mentioned that uh, you know while being caught up in the minutia, it's not unusual for a building principal, if they haven't developed that skill of prioritization, is to focus on things that don't matter as much, and um, mistaking activity with progress. So I want to, hear your thoughts on, how does a principal, how does a leader uh, develop that skill of how to prioritize?
I think all of us entered this profession for one reason, and that was to have an impact on students and children. And so that's the first part of the prioritization. Let me give you an example. Coaching. The effect size of coaching on improving teacher practice is around about 0.5, 0.48, 0.5. The effect size of coaching on student outcomes is 0.08. Sometimes we improve the practice, but don't look at the impact of that practice. And so, of course, there's nothing wrong with improving teacher practice. But as a principal, I want that priority to be about, well, how is this going to affect the students, the learning lives of students? I take the view, very strong view, that a fundamental imperative priority for principals is the climate and culture in every class and across the school, because that's the precursor to everything we do, is that climate and culture. And that climate and culture, I specifically want to be about all students feeling safe in this class to fail and not know, because that's the essence of all learning. And that's sometimes what you don't see in classrooms. We have compliance. We have kids thinking learning is getting it right. We have parents demanding high achievement, failing to realize that achievement is the outcome. It starts with that climate and that culture. And then going back to your sort of opening remarks, like this ability of principals to focus on this kind of impact, it's this simple. Do you have the courage to reliably identify those teachers in your school that are having that large impact, form a coalition of success around them, and then inviting all to join? The biggest issue in our business? Courage. It's tough. It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's much easier to worry about the bus timetables, about the school lunches and all those things. Not that they're unimportant, but they aren't the priorities. A means to an end.
Yeah. Something that you just said there, I think it's really important too. And it is, it's difficult to measure courage, although
No, it's not. Andre, you can see it. You can feel it. You're right. It's difficult pencil and paper. I bet every school you've ever worked in, you can see it.
yeah, absolutely. So that is true. I wholeheartedly believe that. I think that, we started off the conversation about this push and pull between transformational and instructional leaders, however many years ago. That was the debate. And I would argue, based off of something that you just said, that ultimately the priority of a leader has to do with their ability to create and maintain the culture or the environment or the conditions for all these things that we're talking about to happen. At my school, we've talked a lot about just the science, the research around mirror neurons, and how the adults in the building set the stage for our students to do what you just described, and that is to have the courage to fail. And I think that one of the things that's really difficult for teachers is that they may have not had a building leader that provided the safety, the psychological safety to try things and fail themselves. And when a teacher doesn't feel safe to do that, how difficult is it for them to provide that same kind of environment for their students?
Yeah, you're so right. But one of the scary studies one of my the students did a few years ago was ask high school teachers what did they want from their principals. And their answer was, give us the resources and leave us alone. So once again, it's a courage because you are interrupting the teacher's day life, their day mind. To have that, and I want to go back to another comment you mentioned earlier, that improvement orientation. Like one of the things we sadly do sometimes is say we're going to change teachers. Well, some teachers don't need changing. Some do, but all need improving. And it's that skill, the ability to actually do it is what buys the credibility of the principal, of the school leaders. And I think that's what we need to focus on and deal with.
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting dynamic, the difference between, at least by way of terminology, change and improvement.
Yes.
To improve, by default, there is a change that occurs. I think
True,
one of
but
the,
come on, we have beaten up teachers for years and saying, you got to change, you got to change, you got to do this. And so, as Vivian Robinson argues, maybe it's time to not use that language. Let's just use improvement. And you're right. But change means I want to change you, Andre, and now you're going to do this rather than that. As opposed to improvement, you're going to do this, but I want you to do more of this, less of this. It's a different dynamic, but like sometimes, my worry about my own work is I've constructed a narrative, and maybe the narrative isn't new, nothing new under the sun, but it's the narrative of visible learning. It's the narrative of you as the principal, which is really critical in your school. And that narrative, I want to be an improvement. Same with kids. Like my argument is every single kid can improve. And that's what our job is. Why isn't it the same with us?
I agree. Well, one of the things that I think, based off of going back to some of your work, that it's a condition creator for improvement is clarity. And we have a consultant, Dr. Tammy Campbell, the Scholar First, is working with Spokane Public Schools. She cites your research often. She says that clarity is kindness. And we have, to be unclear to students, but have the same expectations for learning really isn't kind at all. And so again, pairing this idea of teacher clarity to leader clarity, how does leader clarity function like teacher clarity, and what might be the most reliable artifacts that show that?
I don't think it's reasonable to expect students to guess what the teacher values and believes. In the same way, I don't think it's reasonable for teachers to have to guess and gamble what the principal school leadership's going to do. Hence that sense of clarity. And clarity means, from a leadership point of view, that your staff know what the program is, what the innovation is, what the implementation is, what the evaluation is. They share in that. They're clear on the goals. They're clear on what it means to be successful in the short and the longer term. And this comes back to something that surprised me a few years ago when I looked at the evidence-based implementation models in education. Can you name one? It's hard to find any. But if you go to every other business, computing, engineering, medicine, you name it, there are so many evidence-based interventions, implementation models. And it kind of is weird that in our business, implementation's our game, but we actually have very few actual robust models that do it. And this comes back to one of the key points on clarity. Your staff must have a clear understanding of what you mean by implementation. How do you know, principal, that it's working? It's not working. How are you going to do an improvement cycle on that, or is it going to be a blame cycle? So clarity for a principal is very much about staff being aware of what it means to implement, where they are in that cycle, what it means to get better, what the success criteria and goals are from that, and how well they're going. Going back to the key point earlier, collectively. It shouldn't be every teacher staff one by one. Collectively, how do we do this? And all that comes from who you are when you, Andre, walk into a room. What you talk about, what you value, what you listen to, who you privilege, and your turn-taking skills to listen to them as well, them to listen to you.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the idea of listening, kind of coming up through the leadership ranks and developing into the leader that I am today. In the early stages of that, the art and the skill of listening was something that was often not talked about at all. And I think, I've come to realize and actually started kind of socializing that myself, probably about 15 years ago, before, um, there was much other attention on it. But, I'd love for you to share with our listeners, what is the impact of listening? Because, from an outsider looking in, it can look like, you're just there, right? But how does a leader actively listen, and then what do they do with what they've listened to create the greatest effect size?
Well, believe it or not, Lynn Sharrett and I published a book earlier this year, Learning to Listen, Listen to Learn. And we argued, like you, that it's probably one of the forgotten dimensions, both from students and teachers. Like, for example, with students, take science of reading. Nearly all of that, phonics, phonological awareness, all that stuff, it's listening. And sometimes we forget that. And so what we developed in the model is that we listen to learn, and it's how we hear, we understand, we appraise, react, we action. Surely the greatest mark of respect that you can show one of your teachers is that not only have you listened, but you've understood what they've said. You don't have to agree. But what often happens in leadership meetings, and perhaps I'm too good at this myself, you wait for someone to shut up so you can talk. That is not respect. For example, in the collective teacher efficacy, one of the highest, if not the highest correlate of success is turn taking. So the next professional learning session, the next staff meeting, how much turn taking? If there's no turn taking, there's no collective efficacy. There's not necessarily much listening. Like we say to students, we need to check for understanding. I want to rephrase it. We need to check for listening before we can understand it. And so I'm absolutely with you that the steps of learning to listen and listen to learn are very much underestimated. And you think of some of your colleagues and some of the leaders that you had in your time, Andre. I bet those that stand out are the ones that listened, not the ones that talked.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to get the new book and promote that through Everyday Principle.
That wasn't even scripted.
The best things come organically, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's turn back to, I think, some connective tissue with leader clarity. And you kind of mentioned it a moment ago, and that's the idea of success criteria. I think that, based off of how I understand your work and your research, is one of the purposes of clarity is to identify and communicate clearly to students what success looks like, sounds like, and or feels like. So taking that from, putting the lens of leadership on success criteria, if success criteria clarify what looks good for students, what might some concrete success criteria for principals be?
I want to start with an implementation model. The first part is good diagnosis. And like in our work in schools, we start in your school saying, let's look across the whole school. What is the evidence you have across 15 or 16 different dimensions? And what's your interpretation of it? And the beauty of that is that you now got baseline data, which we often don't do. And then, as we were saying earlier, then working from that, what is the problem that we want to fix? We know that when teachers and school principals choose professional learning, too often they choose that which they're already good at. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it misses the obvious. What aren't we so good at? Where is the evidence that we can mostly improve? And this is why looking across the school in diagnosis, to me, is the first step towards success criteria. You build a baseline. And then from that, collectively, you say, okay, what do we expect to see in the next 6 weeks on this particular dimension, the next 6 months, or the next year? So collectively, again, obviously with leadership from the top, you're building success criteria. Success criteria is not a thing that you come into the staff room and say, this is what success is going to look like in this school over the next 3 months. Because some teachers are already there. Some teachers, it's a mile away. And some teachers, well, they just wait and see. You build it from doing a really good analysis of what is. You identify with successes, you privilege that, you narrate that, you listen to that. And as I said before, you build that coalition and then invite others to join. And so it becomes very clear, therefore, what you mean by success. It wasn't plucked out of the air. It wasn't coming out of some superintendent's demand on the phone that the school must do this. Like take improving reading and maths. That's a 2 to 3 year journey in any school. But what do you expect to see in the first 6 weeks, first 6 months, year? So you know you're on track to do it. And if you like any school I've ever worked in, it ain't linear. It's up and down. So you constantly have to go back and look. And that success criteria then says, we have success criteria about these 3 or 4 factors. They may change, but overall, that's what we're going to aim for. And it's very fair because you were involved in doing the diagnosis. You're involved in helping setting the benchmarks of what success looks like. And for goodness sake, Andre, when you get there, smell the roses. Celebrate the success from all the people participating.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's there's so many red threads that tie all of these things together. I find myself going back to even just in this conversation, threads that tied this conversation together. One of those things that keeps circling back around is feedback. In visible learning, feedback is one of the things that moves learning. So from the leadership perspective, we're trying to leverage feedback that moves and improves teaching. So you've described feedback as just in time, just for me, and just enough. What does that look like when leaders are coaching teachers and when superintendents are coaching principals?
Well, let me start with the 3 feedback questions. Where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? And it's really fascinating that when you ask teachers and leaders and you analyze the feedback they give, most of it is about where am I going? And, oh my gosh, we're brilliant. And how am I going? But when you ask students, they don't say that at all. From a student point of view, they care primarily, if not exclusively, about where to next, about improvement. In fact, they're improvement engines. And if they don't think when they walk into a classroom that this teacher's going to improve them, they've turned off. I want to put the same parallel with principals. If staff think that you just want to know where you're going and how you're going, that's not so bad because it's the credibility. But they want to know how to improve, and they want you to help them improve. As another example, a few years ago in my political job here in Australia, the minister said, I want a new performance evaluation for teachers. And I said, Minister, for goodness sake, there's a million out there at the moment. They don't make much difference. They're a lot of work, a lot of hassle. No one likes them. You're going to collect data and nothing's going to happen. Like, take my university, we do performance evaluation every year across 4,000 staff, and at best, one gets a negative rating. So what's the point? He said, what do I do? And I said, well, ask the question, what performance evaluation system do teachers like? And sure enough, he commissioned a study. My wife won the contract, and it was very simple. If teachers believe and feel that they improve as a consequence of performance evaluation, they like it. Singapore has a really good model. What it does is every teacher in Singapore is assigned a coach outside the leadership team, often outside the school. And if a teacher doesn't make the annual increment, the coach is fired. It's a really interesting way to think of leadership. If the teachers are not improving, maybe the leaders should go. And so I want to put that notion of feedback. I want you as a principal to be 100% focused on, is the feedback you're giving making a difference? If it's not, you've got the problem, not your staff. And so that where to next feedback, that improvement is, and again, if you think of great schools, they're in it together. They've got a trusting environment where critique is welcomed, where negative evidence is welcomed, because feedback thrives on things that don't work very well. If everything's working perfectly, feedback is kind of not so powerful. And so it's getting that balance right. But I think my major message here in terms of the feedback notions is our job as leaders is to improve the impact of our staff on the learning lives of our kids. And if we're in that together, I think you've got a very healthy school.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. And I think that, I smile when, you threw out the notion of the coach goes if who's being coached doesn't improve. And, when you think about it, in any other industry where coaching is happening, if the players don't improve, if the employees don't improve, the coach does go, sometimes right in the middle of a season, right in the middle of, a project. And I love that. I think that it produces the right amount of creative tension on a team. I think too that, I don't know if you're familiar with Csikszentmihalyi. He wrote the book Flow. And some of what you're talking about takes me back to the reading that we did as a staff. That was one of our book studies last year, trying to understand much of the things we're talking about today around efficacy, collective efficacy, and things like that. Efficacy coming, kind of boiling down to the idea of courage that you mentioned earlier. Efficacy really is the courage or the belief that you're able, to do the thing, whatever it is. And Mahali's research around flow, simplifying here, but to be in a flow state, certain conditions have to be in place. Your skill set and the challenge that's in front of you have to align. If the challenge is too easy, you're not in a flow state. If the challenge is beyond your skill set, you're in a state of frustration, you are not confident, it leads to burnout. And so, I share that because my next wondering is kind of going back to something we've discussed a little bit.
Just to comment there, right? Some
Yeah,
famous person said, great leadership doesn't begin with a title. It begins with the moment your purpose, presence, and practice align. That moment is called flow. You said
yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, it wasn't me. I probably heard it from someone else before.
Right, you were
But
moving.
yeah. But so, going back to this idea of flow, flow being, the ability to achieve flow, having some requisite conditions, takes me back to the idea of collective efficacy. And what I'd like to talk about a little bit more in detail is what conditions actually build collective efficacy, either from the leadership perspective and or the teacher perspective.
The first one is trust. And trust is who you are. Trust is when you walk into a room. Trust is when you open your mouth. Trust is what you talk about. Trust is what you listen to. And so it's a pretty instantaneous notion for many teachers to know whether there's trust in the leadership. And that's a pretty critical enabling condition. That willingness and focus on working out the current situation, respecting what is working and what is not working, rather than rushing in with the next latest gee whiz thing that we're going to do. And communicating that and convincing. One of the aspects of that whole flow is it going to be accepted by the staff? Is it going to become the new normal? Is it going to be the water in the school that this is how we do things here? And that is a really powerful enabling condition. And I have to say, Andre, sometimes when we work with schools, it can take 6 months to 2 years to get to that situation, which is very frustrating because that's 2 years of a kid's life that's messed up whilst we're trying to work out. And often the problem, to be blunt, is the leadership team, not the teachers, about building that trust and demonstrating it. One of the fascinating ones I hinted at earlier is if you ask a student before they walk into a classroom, are you going to learn something from this teacher? And they say, no, I don't care what you do, it's not going to work. In the eyes of the students, you have no credibility. It's no different with the staff. They're looking for credibility and all the things we talked about, enabling conditions. Are you a listener? Are you trust? Can you actually work with me to improve what I'm doing? Or it's just this language? Are you going to bring in the resources, the time, the focus to make the difference? Are we going to do it together or are you just picking on me? So that real notion of building a team, building a collective, and it's that ability of the leadership to feed back to staff their progress and to share the success of that. They're all the enabling conditions.
Yeah, I think, to dovetail on something, the big idea of trust that you just described is transparency. And, when you're talking about that, it had me thinking about your ideas around the visible classroom. And again, what would be the parallel look for leadership would be visible systems. And so if a visible classroom lets anyone see how learning is going, in your opinion, what makes a visible system where any visitor could tell you which practice a school is deliberately getting better at?
I think it's fascinating that in schools, we hardly ever do time and motion studies. And I think it's something we should do a lot more with leadership teams because, as we said before, 80 to 90 decisions you have to make a day on top of the ones that you do in the long term, the demands from the parents, from the superintendents, from the kids, from the teachers, it's ongoing. And one of the hardest things to do is to stop doing things that don't work, the whole de-implementation cycle. And I think that visible leadership, like visible classrooms, is that ability to stand back and see what you're prioritizing, where you're spending your effort, how you've built the team around you. The problems that get through the door of the principal should be pretty substantive for the principal to deal with, or do all the little problems get through as well? And therefore, you haven't got a show of making a difference. So visible leadership, I would be like to look at time and motion studies. Like one of the exciting things to do, and it's scary because it's got massive negatives as well as positives, is a video of a principal's day and then using one of the large language models to analyze it in terms of what was the time spent on, how was it spent, and doing that over a week. But oh my gosh, there's all kinds of ethics things you have to be careful with there. But having some way of looking into what happens, like you know this from before you were a principal. When you became a principal, I don't think you really had much idea of the constant constraints, restraints, pressures, problems that principals face every moment of the day if they let them. And great principals are able to deal with that, are able to prioritize time. And I think that's what I'd be looking for in visible leadership is how you prioritize time.
Yeah, you're right. I currently have 2 principal interns working with me this year, and it's a fascinating case study to have leadership revealed to them in real time. No matter what it is, honestly, if you're an outsider looking in, there's all sorts of assumptions that are made. And the job is and isn't. So it's been these 2 particular teachers are very strong teachers. They both come into the internship with a lot of skills and are recognizing like, oh my gosh, like there is so much intricacy to the work. There's so much, behind the scenes and under the blanket that you just don't realize until you're in there doing it. You said, what I'm trying to model for my interns is how do you navigate the overwhelming noise. I think it was, oh gosh, who was the, I'm thinking of Bill Gates, but it's not him. Who was the CEO of Apple that passed away from pancreatic cancer?
Steve Jobs.
Well, Steve Jobs, yeah. So Steve Jobs was interviewed, when he was still alive, and one of the things that he was noted for is being able to pay attention to what he called the signal and to block out the noise. And I think that in the leadership role, you have to be able to do the same thing. The most effective leaders are able to. You described it, about 20 minutes ago. You talked about being able to prioritize, and that's that ability is being able to focus on what's the 3 to 5 things I have to get done today. Come hell or high water, those things are going to get done, and the other things, if they don't, are not going to get in the way of the 3 to 5 things that do have to get done.
I was a dean head of school 20 plus years in a university, and my simple argument about leadership is it's a function of what you choose not to do. Sometimes you get in trouble. More times you get yourself in trouble by doing everything. The hero leadership doesn't work. I'd love to ask your interns, what do they see you not doing? What do they see you doing? What do they believe you should give up doing? What is low level? What's high level? It'd be fascinating to hear their view after this time of how they're going to model your sense of use of time and priorities. It'd be fascinating.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. My staff knows that I talk and preach feedback so often. Hopefully, it's not becoming noise. Hopefully, it is still one of the signals. It's so funny when I the school where I'm principal now, and I opened. It was a brand new school 2 years ago. We're currently in our 3rd year, but the staff all came from different buildings, and so to Peppersack. And so Each of them obviously is bringing with them their own experience, their own, but part of the experience that they brought with them is, whatever relationship they had with their former principal, some good, some not, not so good, particularly when it comes to trust. And it's taken a full 2 years and may take a little bit longer for some of the staff to like fully trust when I say, give me the feedback and model that it is safe to professionally give your boss feedback. And what a better way to establish that as part of the fabric of how you operate, the fabric of your culture than that.
So if I was one of your teachers, Andre, and said to you, it's not working. What you're doing is actually making me go backwards. It's making me stressed. It's not working. What would your reaction be?
Yeah, my first reaction would be to listen. I need to hear more about there's cause and effect for everything. Everything happens for a reason. So I want to better understand what are the causal factors that are making this teacher feel or perceive what they're feeling this way. I'd also want to understand who else is feeling like this, right? Is it an isolated thing, or is the whole English department feeling like this, or is it even bigger than that? But really going back to the question you asked at the early part of this conversation is, as a leader, when you're troubleshooting and problem solving, you want to know exactly what is the problem that I'm trying to solve, right? So
That's
I don't want to know
exactly.
what yeah.
No, remember there's an ex-mayor of New York, Ed Koch, many years ago. He had a standard phrase everywhere he went. He waved his hands and said, "How am I going?" And he listened. And I think that was a tremendous statement as opposed to most leaders who say, "I'm going to tell you how you're going."
Right. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Okay. We're getting close to the end of our time here. I want to go back to the top of some of the questions that I prepared. And one of those is around intentions. So in the visible learning work that you've done, we talk about learning intentions. The complement or the parent for that would be leadership intentions. So we ask teachers to post their learning intentions. What is the leadership analog, or what are this week's leadership intentions? What should they be? And where should staff be able to see them?
Well, I'm a great fan of program logic as a method of implementation. And the beauty of that is it starts with, as we've been talking, diagnosis, and the diagnosis needs to be in terms of the impact it's going to have on students from a leadership point of view. And then you immediately go to the short, medium, and longer term outcomes. And they define the success criteria of what you expect to see in 6 weeks, 6 months, year. Then, third, you go to the intentions about this is what we intend to do to work from where we are at the moment to where we want to be. And the more transparent they are, the more they're tied into baseline and goals, I think the more success they are. They're anchored, they make sense, and they can be bought into or critiqued as they should be. And so to me, that's the equivalent from a classroom point of view where you have learning intentions for students, but for staff, it's got to be anchored in the baseline and success criteria. And you've got to be seen as a leader to be worrying about those things and assisting and improving to make those things a difference. And it's that I want to reinforce the notion. It's in terms of the impact on the students. It is so easy to say we're going to improve the school by improving how we teach, by improving our curriculum, by improving our assessment, by improving our structures. Well, that's the action. Other means to the ends. The ends is the impact on the student. Is it about students feel like they belong? They feel like they're invited. They don't feel like they're being bullied. They feel like that they are being supported, not controlled. They are making a difference in maths or music or physics or phys ed. And from that, I think you can buy in with nearly every teacher because their heart is in the same place. So often what we do in learning intentions is leadership does to teachers. I want leadership to do to students with teachers.
I love that. I love that idea. And that's the next time we talk, we'll pick up right there.
Good.
Yeah.
Look
Well,
forward to your views on this because not only are you brand new school, being a principal, but I know you're thinking quite deeply and writing about this too.
absolutely. Well, John, thank you again. I'm glad that we were finally able to make this happen. The 19-hour difference threw some wrenches in there, but we were finally able to make it happen. So anyways, from all of us at Everyday Principal, John, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thanks a lot, Andre.
We
got there.
Thank you for listening to EP Talks. EP Talks is the official podcast for Everyday Principal. Everyday Principal is the leading learning management system focused on principal development. Assets within the LMS include EP Talks, the EP blog, the EP collaborative, groups and forums on the most relevant topics in K-12 education, EP University, customized courses and programs aligned with your school district's strategic plan, EP Publishing, opportunities to author and write for Everyday Principal, and EP Microlearning, opportunities for bite-sized learning. Each asset within the EP LMS is an opportunity for you to grow and earn continuing education credits or clock hours. Contact us today for more information.